Signal is the world's most widely used, truly private communication service. We're not big tech, we're a nonprofit. We don't make money through surveillance, and we offer our services for free because we think everyone deserves the human right to safety, privacy, and freedom of speech. So I'm here today not as a politician, but as someone who's deeply concerned about one singular provision in the online safety bill that threatens to undermine encryption and fundamental security of the core infrastructure of the UK, but the world around beyond that.
Damian Collins, what the government is proposing is mass surveillance. It would hand power to repressive regimes the world over.
No, I don't accept that. I mean, this bit of the online safety bill we're talking about is an important but quite small piece of the bill, dealing with messaging services, and it only relates to child sexual exploitation content. So the worst content, where it is not a matter of context, it is without dispute that this content is vile and it is illegal. And what we want companies to do is to use their best endeavours to proactively detect content related to child sexual exploitation so that it can be flagged and investigated.
What do you make of what you've just heard?
What I can say is that there is no way to create a backdoor that only the good guys can walk through. And what's being proposed here in the context of end-to-end encryption is a backdoor. And we know from decades of history, from decades of serious research, that there's no such thing as a safe backdoor. If the British police can get in, hackers can get in. If the British police can get in, hostile nations can get in. If the British police can get in, Putin can get in, the Iranian government can get in, and others wanting to do harm can get in. So it's really important that we maintain the security and integrity of these systems.
I agree with Meredith on that point. I mean, I don't think it would be safe to say there's a safe backdoor, because once you create it, other people will find it as well. That's why we're not going to ask companies to break encryption. What the regulator would do, I would imagine with a company like Signal, is when the regulator, Ofcom, is creating the codes of practice, they might say to Signal, well, what sort of data do you gather? And if Signal says, well, we don't gather data about people's messages, we can't possibly look at this, the regulator won't say you need to break encryption. It'll say that's fine, but you do have policies, let's say, on legal and appropriate use. How do you enforce those? What do you do?
None of that is specified in the bill, and this is our concern, because we hear things that are sensible like that from people like you, and then we look at the bill, and what is specified is a regime that would give Ofcom the power to demand that everyone in the UK download spyware that checks their messages before they're sent against a database of what is permissible to say and send and what is not permissible. And that is a precedent that authoritarian regimes are looking to the UK to set, to point to a liberal democracy that was the first to expand surveillance. In the terms of the UN Human Rights Commissioner, this is unprecedented paradigm-shifting surveillance, and paradigm-shifting not in the good way.
Well, what do you do if there are child abuse images being shared on Signal? What is your dealing with law enforcement on that point? Or do you just not know?
Look, this gets down to the brass tacks and the facts of the rules of mathematics, the rules of physics. There is either encryption that protects everyone.
But there's child abuse images that could be shared on your platform that you wouldn't know about, or you would know about, but you won't tell law enforcement.
There is either a backdoor that lets me and the Russian government and hackers in. We can't look. Encryption either permits me and everyone to look or no one to look.
So if child abuse is being shared on your platform, you don't know?
We absolutely cannot know. And look, this is concerning, but there are other law enforcement tools. Look, the independent review of children's social services, the UK's own, recommended $2.6 billion in funding over the next 6 years for child welfare services. These are the essential services that prevent abuse. What did they get? About 7% of that. So, I champion people like Damian and others really putting the pedal to the metal on this issue and demanding that the government do more.
I think Kathy, your question, I think, is a really important one. I think people need to know, and the regulator will have the right to ask these questions, is you have in your terms of services Signal regulations on legal and appropriate use of the service. You don't allow people to use Signal to break the law. So how do you enforce that? What do you do? How do you enforce your own terms of service?
I mean, we can get into a rabbit hole of how one nonprofit enforces or doesn't enforce its policies, but right now what we're looking at is a provision.
No, that's not a rabbit hole, though, is it?
It's quite fundamental. I mean, because I think it's really important that you have those terms of service to say you don't allow illegal use. WhatsApp have similar terms of service as well. And I think it's important that people understand how is it enforced.
Absolutely. And that, enforcement happens through law enforcement agencies. Enforcement happens through other mechanisms. We are not an enforcement agency. We are a technology platform. We're a nonprofit. And what we are working to do is provide actually private communication. And look, in the history of human communication, for hundreds of thousands of years, the default was private.
Right.
Yeah,
so
we can't let large
just pick up on
tech
that.
companies.
You're the president of
We
Signal.
can't
We don't
let
often get the
large
chance.
tech companies set the
Yeah.
norms for surveillance for all of us.
I
Like,
completely-
you and I both need to check these companies on changing the norms for human communication to be completely surveilled by a handful of companies. What Signal is trying to do is keep the default of privacy that has existed through
And
human
I
many of
agree
your
with-
colleagues are in
yeah.
favour of free speech, aren't you?
Well, no, but I think that just this question I think is really important because I mean there's a huge amount I think we would agree
Yeah,
on, and
I-
Signal is an exemplar in terms of I think protecting user privacy and minimising data gathering, and that's why so many people, myself included, use Signal. But I think this is really important. This question: if you say in your terms of service that you don't allow illegal use and you don't allow inappropriate use, does that have any meaning?
We enforce our terms of service when we have evidence of violations.
But you won't have evidence because you don't know if child abuse images are being shared, because that is
Look, we can't
core of your privacy.
collapse these issues. What we're talking about is encryption either works or not, right? Over the weekend, I heard about a letter that is being signed by the world's top encryption experts.
Yeah.
These are hundreds of academics at universities across the world, again, reaffirming the expert consensus that at the level of mathematical laws, encryption either protects people or it doesn't. It is either safe or it is vulnerable. And what's being proposed in this bill, if we can get back to the provision that we're concerned about, is a mechanism that would allow the evisceration of privacy, safety, and encryption.
Okay,
in the UK.
answer that last point, because this is about freedom of speech, it's about privacy. That is something that usually Conservatives like yourself hold dear.
Yeah, so it doesn't require the breaking of encryption. The legislation doesn't require that.
It absolutely
no, it doesn't.
does.
It
A door
requires,
at the front, a door at the back, at the top or the bottom. It doesn't matter where the door is. It's unsafe.
It doesn't require the breaking of encryption. That's why this question about how companies enforce their terms of service is important, because that is one of Ofcom's principal jobs, is to go to companies and say, that's what you say in your terms of service, what do you do? And I think what Meredith was saying is, if law enforcement came forward with evidence that suggested someone using Signal was using it to share child sexual exploitation images, Signal would act on that evidence. But
let's just check that is what she was saying,
What Signal would do, would Signal check?
David, let's bring in Meredith on this point.
I feel like we are circling the drain on this question, and absolutely we would. But what we're talking about has higher stakes.
No, what we're trying to get at here is what would Signal do? Because this is fun. This will be the most important bit of the online safety bill. In terms of the day-to-day working of your company with this bill, it will be answering the regulators' questions of how do you enforce your own terms of service.
I think what's important here...
But hey, answer that point.
Yeah. We enforce our terms and service when we have evidence that there is problematic use. But we don't... let's get back to the level of encryption and what the bill actually
she's answered
says.
that question. You're happy with that answer.
How do you do it? Do you just take the police's word for it? Or
Do you want to shadow me at work for a week?
No,
Is that what you're asking?
That's an idea.
What I'm saying is, how do you do it? You say you take action, but how?
It depends on the situation, and we don't discuss confidential encounters with law enforcement.
Do you investigate the account, the user's account?
Absolutely, when warranted, but we're not going into those details. What we are talking about here is that the UK is poised to set a damning precedent. If we break encryption in the UK, if this mass surveillance provision goes forward, we have authoritarian countries around the world that are looking to the UK to set the precedent. And let's be real about this. The international human rights organization Freedom House has classified about 40% of the world's population as living under repressive regimes. So we're looking at Iran.
Because we're not going to require de-encryption. But what we will require is companies...
Then you need to clarify the bill.
Can it be amended and clarified?
It absolutely can be amended and
Suggest
clarified.
an amendment.
Yeah, there's Amendment 205 that clarifies that this provision will not be used to break encryption.
Right. What's wrong with taking up that amendment?
Because we don't need to set out things the bill's not going to do. We set out in the bill the things it is going to do, and what it is going to do is require companies to use available technologies. Now, there are different sorts of messaging platforms, as I said before. If you've got a messaging platform that isn't encrypted, available technologies will help it detect things it can already see and find. If a messaging service is encrypted, we're not going to require that encryption to be broken or redesigned. I agree with
that's
what...
a promise from you that there's no evidence in the bill.
If you don't get the amendments that you want to your satisfaction, will you go ahead with your threat to quit the UK?
Look, we will never quit the UK willingly. We believe that everyone in the world,
But unwillingly, you would quit the UK.
we would be forced to quit because, again, there's no such thing as encryption that works for some and doesn't work for others.
Does
It's
that concern you that you've got these big companies? I mean, Signal's not the only one. Clearly, WhatsApp is also threatening to quit the UK. Apple also has concerns. That's hugely concerning for UK PLC, isn't it?
Well, no, it doesn't concern me because they won't do it. They're not,
She's just said she will.
But
Are
if
you
I think
calling me a liar,
no.
Damian?
Well, the reason I'm saying you won't, in your case, I don't think you'll do it. You may do it. Is that because?
So you're calling me a liar?
No, what I'm saying is the
Damian,
scenario that you are
I'm not a
envisaging.
liar.
No, I just think you're wrong. With respect, I just think you're wrong. And
You think
therefore,
I'm wrong about my own views?
No.
Oh, come on.
No, I think you're wrong in terms of what you'll be asked to do. I think when you go through the process with the regulator of agreeing codes of practice, which will be agreed for individual companies, so Signal won't be treated like WhatsApp and other messaging
Let's be
services.
clear, none of
It'll
this
be
is in the
bespoke.
bill.
No,
None of
it
this is
Well,
in the bill.
sorry.
It's absolutely
It is-
not specified
What is
in the
absolutely
bill.
specified in the bill is that the regulator's job, once the bill becomes law, is to create codes of practice. Those codes of practice then laid before
What is
Parliament.
in the bill is that Ofcom could be has the power to require accredited technology. We know the accredited technology that is being developed would create serious backdoors and implement a regime of mass surveillance unprecedented in a
You've
liberal
made that
democracy.
point several times. I accept your point. I want to stand back for a minute because what I want to ask you, Meredith, is, big tech abuses. I'm not holding you responsible for big tech as a whole. I completely understand that. But when you look at the death by suicide of Molly Russell, Cambridge Analytica, the scandalous wholesale misuse of personal data, is it fair to say that big tech as a whole has brought this regulatory environment on itself?
Well, I absolutely agree with Damian and so many others that big tech must be held accountable. And I think part of what's happening here is that big tech has infiltrated so many areas of our lives that we have collapsed these issues into an omnibus bill with some really great parts and some really disturbing and democracy undermining parts, like this provision. But I am committed to holding big tech accountable. And indeed, I joined Signal because I wanted to protect people from the kind of surveillance that big tech perpetrates every day. I want to protect the teens in Uganda, where they just passed a law that makes being gay punishable by murder. I want to protect the young women in Iran who are protesting democracy. I want to protect the people on the front lines in Ukraine who are fighting Putin. And all of this relies on being able to communicate safely and securely outside of this nexus of surveillance.
With this bill, which some of your colleagues say is an illiberal mess, you're punishing the good guys like Meredith.
Well, no, we're not, because we're not. I don't know how many times I have to say this. We're not going to require companies to de-encrypt or create backdoors into their.
To specify that, and I'll go home and we'll all be happy.
So the legislation doesn't say that now. So we're not taking anything out. We don't need to, because the bill is really
But the
clear.
broader point, have you, because of the abuses of big tech as a whole, ended up overreaching with this bill?
No, not
and
at
it's
all.
become a mess. It's become a Frankenstein's monster, it's been called.
Well, no, I don't agree with that at all. What the bill does, fundamentally, is two or three very important and very simple things. It says that and the bulk of the bill really deals with what we call user-to-user platforms, so social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok and so on, it says the minimum safety standards that should be set on those platforms should be based on UK laws. And also that the companies should be clear what their terms of service are and that they should enforce them consistently. And that the companies they have liabilities. And in America, this concept doesn't exist. The idea that a platform may have liabilities for how people use their service, even though their business model is built around how people use their service, and actively promoting and recommending content to people is fundamental to the way they make money out of their service, that they are liable for that. They have responsibilities. And that is absolutely core. And I would say in the House of Commons, there may be people that raise questions, or as Meredith is doing, about a particular point of it. I think everyone agrees, or I'd say the vast majority of people agree, those principles are right.
Right. Do you think you're going to get your way? You're going to persuade MPs like Damian, because he doesn't seem very persuaded by your argument just now.
I hope so, because to me, this isn't a game, right? We are looking at the possible evisceration of privacy and security on which the financial and economic infrastructures rely. And so, I'm not here as a politician. I really hope that we can, look at this rule clearly, that we can, wave away the smoke and mirrors. Because look, this is real. Like, tech companies sell snake oil all the time, from Theranos to Mark Zuckerberg promising that AI is going to solve content moderation. We know that they continually overstate the capabilities of the technology, and that's what's happening here. That's what's happening with these vendors saying that they can break encryption but maintain privacy, that they can make client-side scanning that will work to reveal the bad while protecting the good. It is snake oil. It is not true, and every expert who is not invested personally in this project is calling it out as a fallacy.
Okay, final thought, is big tech just too big to regulate? You're bitten off more than you can chew.
Not at all. We regulate financial services globally. We regulate complex industries. The reason we need these regulations in tech is, I think, as everyone can see, sitting down with a tech company and trying to get straight answers to simple questions is very difficult. And that's
You got a few.
That's why we need a regulator that can actually have the legal power to do that and say to a company, if you won't give us the information that we ask for, then you could face criminal sanctions for that.
Damian Collins, Meredith Whittaker, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.